Picture this. It's 1991, and there's a blonde wrestler in WCW who looks like he belongs in a boy band, not a wrestling ring. Fast forward to 1998, and that same guy is driving beer trucks into arenas and stunning his boss on live television. The transformation from pretty boy to the most iconic anti-authority figure in wrestling history didn't happen overnight. Austin's career went through more phases than the moon, and each one tells a story about how wrestling itself was changing. Stunning Steve Austin. What do you get when you cross a soap opera heartthrob with a wrestling ring? You get the most un-Stone Cold version of Stone Cold that ever existed. Meet Stunning Steve Austin, a blonde Ken doll who spent more time on his hair than his finishing moves, strutting around WCW like he owned a modeling agency instead of a wrestling contract. This version of Austin debuted as a heel from Hollywood, California, and quickly captured the television championship while working with Paul Heyman as part of the Dangerous Alliance. The Hollywood Blondes tag team made Austin look like he belonged in a boy band, complete with flowing locks that would make Fabio jealous. But here's the weird part. He could actually wrestle. Austin and Brian Pillman embraced their flamboyant Hollywood gimmick, taunting opponents and using props while displaying genuine chemistry as a team. Austin was basically playing discount Ric Flair, copying the Nature Boy's strut and attitude, but without any of the charisma that made Flair a legend. The guy who would later become famous for drinking beer and raising hell was obsessing over his appearance like he was preparing for a photo shoot instead of a fight. Despite his substantial television championship reign and involvement with major storylines, Austin delivered few promos and lacked the distinct character needed to connect with audiences. WCW treated him like expensive furniture. Nice to look at, but not really useful for anything important, which explains why his promos were about as memorable as yesterday's weather. Little did anyone know that this pretty boy phase was just Austin's way of learning how not to be a wrestler, setting up the biggest character transformation in wrestling history. But here's where things get interesting. Austin was about to discover that being angry paid a lot better than being beautiful. Superstar Steve Austin. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to your career is getting fired, and Steve Austin was about to prove that point in the most explosive way possible. ECW became Austin's anger management therapy, except instead of learning to control his rage, Paul Heyman taught him to weaponize it into the most brutal promos wrestling had ever seen. What happened was, Austin took all the frustration from his WCW release and turned it into pure wrestling gold. This is where Austin discovered that curse words weren't just for backstage arguments, they were career gold. And suddenly the pretty boy was spitting venom like a rattlesnake. Austin's ECW run lasted only a few months, but it completely changed how he approached wrestling. Austin 316 was born here, not in WWE, as Austin channeled all his real-life frustration about being fired into unscripted rants that made fans forget he ever had blonde hair. Heyman gave Austin something WCW never did, a microphone and permission to be himself, which turned out to be a very angry, very dangerous version of himself. Austin's promos became raw and unfiltered, featuring the kind of intensity that made people stop what they were doing and pay attention. Austin even stole the stunner from Mikey Whipwreck during this time, proving that even his finishing move came from his rebellious ECW phase. He learned about connecting with audiences through genuine emotion would serve him well in his next chapter. But Austin was just getting warmed up, because WWE was about to give him a much bigger stage for his newfound rage addiction. Early WWF Stone Cold. Imagine if someone took a pretty boy, threw him in a personality freezer, and what came out was wrestling's most dangerous Iceman. That's exactly what happened when Austin became Stone Cold. WWE initially tried to turn Austin into the Ringmaster, a generic wrestling character that made about as much sense as putting a muzzle on a guard dog. Ted DiBiase served as his mouthpiece, which meant Austin wasn't even allowed to talk and showcase the charisma that ECW had helped him discover. But Austin had other plans, and those plans involved becoming the coldest, most calculated killer in wrestling, inspired by actual serial killer Richard Kuklinski, which should tell you everything about his new mindset. Austin hated the Ringmaster gimmick and actively started changing his look by shaving his head, growing a goatee, and switching to black trunks. The transformation from stunning to Stone Cold wasn't just a name change. It was like watching someone discover their evil twin and deciding the evil twin was way more fun. Austin's feud with Brian Pillman showcased this new vicious side, especially during the infamous home invasion angle that blurred the lines between wrestling and reality in ways that made fans genuinely uncomfortable. His rivalry with Bret Hart culminated in the double turn at WrestleMania 13, where Austin became a hero by refusing to quit while bleeding all over the ring like some kind of masochistic superhero. The Austin 3:16 promo, after winning King of the Ring, launched his character into the main event scene.
Austin 3:16 says I just whipped your ass.
This era proved that Austin's best character trait wasn't being stunning or even being cold. It was being completely unpredictable and slightly terrifying. But Austin was about to discover that being unpredictable was nothing compared to what happened when you gave him a boss to hate. Peak attitude Stone Cold. Most people drink beer to relax after work, but Steve Austin turned drinking beer into the most over act in wrestling history, and somehow that made perfect sense. Peak Stone Cold wasn't just a wrestler. He was America's spirit animal, representing every person who ever wanted to stun their boss and drive away in a beer truck. What happened was, Austin became the perfect outlet for workplace frustration during a time when corporate downsizing and office politics were making everyone's life miserable. Austin's weekly beatdowns of Vince McMahon became must-see TV, turning corporate authority into wrestling's greatest villain and workplace violence into entertainment gold. The writers had to put themselves in the mind of Austin and think, what would Stone Cold do to top the previous week's antics? The beer truck incident, the cement mixer attack, and the Zamboni entrance proved that Austin had turned vehicular mayhem into an art form that would make action movie directors jealous. These segments were far from being mere stunts. They were symbolic acts of defiance against the establishment. Austin carried WWE on his back during the Monday Night Wars, with his anti-authority persona perfectly capturing the rebellious spirit of the late 90s when questioning authority was basically a national pastime. His character mirrored the public's growing distrust of institutions, making his on-screen actions cathartic for viewers. His matches with The Rock, especially at WrestleMania 15, created the template for modern wrestling main events, proving that two bald guys hitting each other could draw more money than any Hollywood movie. This era established Austin as wrestling's ultimate rebel. But more importantly, it proved that sometimes the best way to connect with people is to do exactly what they wish they could do. But success has a funny way of making people try to fix things that aren't broken, and Austin was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Paranoid, Stone Cold. What happens when you take America's favorite rebel and try to make him the bad guy? You get one of wrestling's most awkward experiments in character assassination. The heel turn at WrestleMania 17 was supposed to be Austin's villain origin story, but trying to make fans boo Stone Cold was like trying to make people hate apple pie and freedom. Austin felt his character was becoming stale and pushed for the change, even though McMahon had reservations about turning wrestling's biggest star into a villain. Austin's alliance with Vince McMahon made about as much sense as fire teaming up with water, creating a storyline that confused fans more than it entertained them. The WWF had just acquired WCW, marking the end of the Monday Night Wars. But instead of celebrating victory, they made their biggest hero join forces with his greatest enemy. The paranoid heel version of Austin was like watching your favorite uncle suddenly become suspicious of everyone at family gatherings, constantly looking over his shoulder and acting weird for no good reason. Austin's comedy skits with Kurt Angle during this period were actually hilarious, proving that even when his character made no sense, Austin could still entertain people just by being naturally funny. Their segments centered around competing for McMahon's approval and created some of the funniest moments in wrestling history. The alliance storyline that followed was wrestling's equivalent of a movie sequel that nobody asked for, featuring WCW and ECW invading WWE in a plot that felt more forced than a smile at a dentist appointment. This era taught everyone that some characters are too iconic to change, and trying to make Stone Cold into a traditional heel was like trying to put toothpaste back in the tube. But Austin wasn't done experimenting with his character, and his next phase would create one of wrestling's most annoying legacies. What? Era Stone Cold. Sometimes a single word can define an entire era, and in Austin's case, that word was so simple and so annoying that it's still haunting wrestling crowds today. The "what?" chant started as Austin's way of mocking his opponents, but it quickly became a monster that escaped its cage and terrorized every wrestler who tried to cut a promo. What happened was, Austin created a simple taunt that crowds could easily repeat, and they ran with it in ways nobody expected. Austin had accidentally created wrestling's most persistent meme, and like all good memes, it refused to die even when everyone was sick of it. The chant's repetitive nature made it perfect for interrupting any speech or segment, giving crowds a way to hijack shows whenever they felt like it. The irony was that "what" became more over than most wrestlers, with crowds chanting it during serious moments, emotional segments, and basically any time someone opened their mouth on WWE television. Austin himself was dealing with personal problems during this time: prescription drug issues, a failing marriage, and the physical toll of years of punishment were catching up with him. His dissatisfaction with WWE's creative direction was growing, especially when the company seemed to treat him like just another performer instead of their biggest star. The final straw came when WWE wanted him to lose to Brock Lesnar in a throwaway match on Raw with no build, which was like asking Beethoven to play background music at a grocery store. Austin's walkout from WWE proved that even Stone Cold had limits. And sometimes the biggest statement you can make is simply refusing to show up. But walking away from wrestling isn't as easy as it sounds, especially when your body is falling apart and you've got one more match left in you. Broken down, Stone Cold. What do you do when your body is basically a collection of injuries held together by stubbornness, and you still want to wrestle? You become broken down Stone Cold. Austin's neck was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot, but he still had one more match in him, and he was determined to go out on his own terms. The motorcycle entrance became Austin's signature during this period, partly because it looked cool, but mostly because walking to the ring was becoming genuinely difficult for him. What happened was Austin found a way to mask his physical limitations while still making a grand entrance that fit his rebellious character. The bike served as both spectacle and necessity, giving fans the Stone Cold entrance they expected while sparing Austin's deteriorating body. Austin's final match against The Rock at WrestleMania 19 was like watching a legend trying to capture lightning in a bottle one last time, knowing it might be the last chance anyone would get to see it. The physical limitations were obvious. Austin couldn't move like he used to, couldn't take the bumps he once thrived on, and every match felt like it might be the one that finally broke him completely. His neck was on its last legs after years of punishment. This era proved that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is admit when it's time to stop, even when stopping feels impossible. But retirement from wrestling doesn't mean retirement from WWE, and Austin was about to discover a whole new way to be Stone Cold without getting Stone Cold stunned. General Manager Stone Cold. Picture Stone Cold Steve Austin in a business suit making executive decisions, and you'll understand why this era felt like watching a tiger try to do taxes. Austin became co-general manager of Raw, which meant the ultimate anti-authority figure was now literally the authority, creating a contradiction that somehow worked. What happened was, WWE needed to find a way to keep Austin on television after his wrestling career ended, so they put him in charge of running the show. Watching Austin try to be professional while still being Stone Cold was like watching someone try to be polite while also being a tornado. Technically possible, but hilariously awkward. His feud with Eric Bischoff as co-GM created some genuinely entertaining television, proving that Austin could be funny even when he was trying to be serious about paperwork and meeting schedules. Their power struggles involved bureaucratic absurdities that highlighted Austin's natural comedic timing, something that became more obvious now that he wasn't focused on wrestling matches. Austin's role in major storylines like Kane's Monster heel run showed that he could still move the needle even when he wasn't throwing punches, using his star power to elevate other wrestlers. The comedy gold came from watching Austin try to handle normal business situations with his typical Stone Cold approach, like using a stunner to solve scheduling conflicts. Austin would inject his signature rebellious spirit into everyday corporate decisions, making boring authority segments entertaining through pure charisma. This era proved that Austin's charisma was so strong that he could make even the most boring corporate role entertaining, but it also felt like watching Superman work as an accountant. After WrestleMania 20, Austin's days as a regular TV character were ending, but his legend was just getting started. Part-time legend, Stone Cold. In the modern era, every Stone Cold appearance is treated like the second coming. And somehow that's not even an exaggeration. Part-time legend Austin shows up just often enough to remind everyone why he was the biggest star wrestling ever produced, making each appearance feel like a special event. What happened was, WWE learned to use Austin sparingly, turning his rare appearances into must-see moments that generated massive excitement among fans who remembered his peak years. For years, fans begged for Austin to have one more match, with dream opponents like CM Punk and Brock Lesnar being discussed, but Austin seemed content to stay retired. His sporadic appearances throughout the 2010s were limited to delivering signature stunners or serving as a special guest, keeping his wrestling boots firmly in retirement. Then 2022 happened, and Austin shocked the world by wrestling Kevin Owens at WrestleMania in a classic Attitude Era-style brawl that proves some things never get old. The match was surreal because it felt like time travel. Austin looked like he'd never left. The crowd reacted like it was 1998, and for one night, the Attitude Era was back. Every Austin appearance since has been a reminder of what wrestling was like when it was truly cool, serving as both nostalgia and a measuring stick for current stars. His enduring popularity proves that some connections with audiences never fade, no matter how much time passes. This era shows that true legends don't fade away. They just become more legendary with time, and Austin's legacy continues to grow even in semi-retirement. Austin proved that you can go home again, especially if home is stunning your boss and drinking beer in front of 80,000 screaming fans. The comedic tragedy of Steve Austin's career is that no matter how hard he tried to reinvent himself, he always ended up being the same beer-drinking, boss-stunning rebel, and that's exactly what made him perfect. Austin's evolution proves that sometimes the best character development is just becoming a more extreme version of who you already are, like a personality amplifier that only goes up to 11. So the next time your boss annoys you, just remember that Steve Austin convinced an entire generation that stunning your supervisor and driving away in a beer truck is a legitimate problem-solving technique. Like and subscribe for 1,000 years of luck. Until next time.